Today is Monday, September 15th, 2025. This is First Alert Weather Plus. I'm meteorologist Nicholas Snyder. We're going to give you a rundown on everything you need to know in terms of the weather and what's impacting us right now. And the big story right now, of course, is the drought. We have been dealing with major drought conditions, a quick onset of a drought, by the way, too. A flash drought, if you want to call it that. Closer look at that. We're going to give you all the details on what you need to know with that. Tony's going to look at some algae blooms and what that means and why this is occurring in the Ohio River. We've had a lot of reports from people in Ashland, for instance, calling about why the water smells so bad over there along the Ohio River, and that has all to do with some algae. We're talking about that, plus your long-term forecast and what it could look like next weekend for the Jackson, Ohio Apple Festival, big-time event going on over there in Jackson, Ohio. We'll have the latest on what you need to know for that. Let's first start about our drought. Again, we have not had a whole lot of rain over the last couple of weeks here. Our last measurable rain was Saturday, September 6th in both Huntington and Charleston, where we received about a half an inch to an inch of rain, and that's about it. That certainly has not really helped the drought situation that we've really seen over much of the region, and we continue to deal with quite a bit of issues in terms of why we're just not seeing any sort of precipitation. Let's talk about the current moisture content in the atmosphere. Dew points in the 50s. Our air temperatures were near 90 today. In fact, Huntington did officially hit 90. So when you see a dew point of 55 degrees here in Huntington, 56 degree dew point here in Charleston, upper 50s and lower 60s dew points all around, that means there is not a whole lot of moisture to be had in the atmosphere. And that really doesn't help us because any sort of forcing that comes through that could provide us with some rain gets choked out, gets dried out as that rain tries to fall. That relative humidity in the 40s and 30s percentile right here. 34% relative humidity Huntington, 38% relative humidity in Charleston. We're up near 50% over there in Portsmouth. Look how dry Cincinnati is at 29%. Overall, 30 to 45%, the main kind of theme around the region as far as that humidity is concerned. I want you to notice, though, Logan, 56% relative humidity. This is due to a little bit of moisture that's down there, a weak area of low pressure that's formed off the coast right here, and I'll highlight this for you right here, the swirl that you see just off the coast of the Outer Banks. It is trying its hardest to pull in a little fetch of moisture from the Atlantic Ocean into our region. The unfortunate thing, though, is we have the Appalachian Mountains. Really beautiful scenery around our area for sure, but these Appalachian Mountains act as a barrier, a wall, if you will. As air slopes up the mountains, all the moisture from the Atlantic just gets condensed out. So once it slopes down, it's all dried out, and all that dry air kind of filters into our region on the other side of those Appalachian Mountains, and that's why we're staying so dry. Meanwhile, further to the west, we're seeing a few more systems out here driving in the development of the first snows of the season in the Rockies out here toward Denver, out in Utah, parts of the Wasatch Front and the Front Range here, parts of Wyoming seeing that as well. Obviously, we're not anywhere close to that. We're in the 90s. We're in this very warm pattern. So the cooler pattern setting up here with more active weather in this corridor and the dryness and the heat set up in this corridor right here. And we're going to continue to see that. This is what's known as a Rex block pattern, so not a whole lot in terms of any relief as far as drought conditions is to be expected here over the next 7 days or so. Let's talk about that drought monitor. We're in a level 2 moderate drought. Much of the region in that, of course, down toward Salyersville, down toward Prestonsburg and Pikeville, you're not in any sort of drought conditions, but this is a moderate drought. Out toward Webster, Upshur, and Randolph counties, that's a severe drought. And a lot of the United States, in fact, dealing with drought conditions all over. Severe drought in parts of the Ozarks here and parts of the Mississippi Valley in western Tennessee, northern Arkansas, southern Missouri, places like that, even southern parts of Illinois dealing with that. Moderate drought conditions northwest Ohio, severe drought conditions northern panhandle of West Virginia into eastern Ohio and western PA. And, of course, the moderate drought just continues over much of our region as well. So what does all this mean? What does it mean to have a moderate drought? Well, meteorologist Hannah Hayes talks about what exactly we're seeing here in the drought monitor and what it means to have each drought level.
past few weeks, we've all been mentioning the drought and frequently showing you this map. But on air, we don't always have time to break it down, so let me explain it for you. The U.S. Drought Monitor is updated once a week, every Thursday morning. The experts analyze data on certain factors from the week, such as temperatures, soil moisture, precipitation, stream flow, and vegetation. But looking back at our map, you can see in our region that there is a lot of yellow and this tan color that's covering the majority of the viewing area. This indicates most of the region is under a dry period, shown in yellow, or a moderate level drought, level 0 and level 1. A level 0 isn't an official drought classification. Instead, it indicates drier than normal conditions for areas that are preparing for a drought or simply recovering from a previous drought, sort of like a transition phase. A level 1 drought, shown in the tan color, means we are abnormally dry, and this could cause some damage to crops, add risk to wildfire spread, or even impact some stream levels. Right now, this is impacting most of our viewing area and in all 3 states. But looking closer at our map, you notice this dark orange area circled towards Elkins, and that means that they're under a level 2, which was considered a severe drought. In this area, they're more likely to see high fire spread risks and even some crop or pasture loss. Now, over the next several days, chances of rain are little to none for most of the viewing area. So check back in on Thursday as the Drought Monitor updates so you can see how conditions have changed across the region and what with the weather that we've had over the past several weeks, such as above average temperatures and the lack of impactful rainfall. But we're going to continue to monitor the drought conditions across our viewing area and give you the latest updates as we see them, especially about those most latest rain chances.
And the drought conditions, again, just continue over much of the region. We're under a level 2, as Hannah was talking about. That's a moderate drought concern for a lot of us. And this has really just continued over the last month or so. We had a really dry August. We had a really dry September so far, and this is kind of metastasized into that flash drought situation that we've seen. So that level 2 moderate drought is concerning. You mentioned also, you at least heard Hannah mention, the chance of some precipitation this weekend. And there is that chance, but that chance since has gone down throughout the day thanks to some new data coming in, unfortunately. So really doesn't look to be an end in sight anytime soon here to really help the situation that we are seeing. And again, much of the United States in some sort of drought condition. In fact, parts of New Hampshire up there in an extreme drought in that red. Much of the west and Intermountain West, of course, also dealing with that, and that would mean wildfire concern. And for us locally, it could mean some wildfire concern too, because we had such an early wet summer. Later on in the summer, when you see those drier conditions, all that fuel, all the vegetation that benefited from all the rains earlier on in the summer just dry up. And if you get a day with a lot of strong wind, that's where you could run into some issues with some dry vegetation. Meteorologist Dylan Godet has a look at your zone-by-zone forecast for your day tomorrow to see if we get any shower activity that could be coming in the forecast.
Hey everyone, First Alert Meteorologist Dylan Godet here with a look at your zone-by-zone forecast for your day on Tuesday. We are tracking warm temperatures out there, a little bit above average. We will see increase in cloud cover across the region. One area important forecast will be the Jackson, Ohio location, and that's where we have the Apple Festival going on this week. It's going to be a mainly dry week for you out there. Temperatures not too bad for your day on Tuesday. Low 80s, possibly getting into the mid 80s by the late afternoon. Really just depends on how much cloud cover we do see across the region. The eastern Kentucky area will be into the low to mid 80s, definitely low 80s, right around 80 degrees across southeastern portions of eastern Kentucky. And then southern West Virginia coal fields, you're into the low 80s with mostly cloudy to partly cloudy skies. Looking at central West Virginia, same deal for you, ranging from the low to mid 80s, really just depending on where you're at. The further west that you go, a little clear, slightly warmer. The further east that you go, we may even stay into the 70s for some of those locations, with temperatures struggling to climb thanks to the cloud cover.
Yeah, that setup for the Apple Festival tomorrow, really not looking too bad for a lot of us. And the weekend, that's where things could get a bit tricky. We'll talk about the weekend in just a second, get you a forecast for that festival a little bit later on once we get into that long-term forecast. But the overall pattern, again, minor disturbances that will try to work their way on through. A couple of little kinks here in the lines. Of course, these lines represent pressure or height above the ground. That this air mass contains a thickness of air. Warmer air has higher heights, higher pressure, higher thickness, whereas colder air has that lower thickness, the lower pressure. And so the cooler air kind of centered, if you even want to call it that, over this general area right here. I'm about to highlight that for you. Right in here is that kind of lower pressure center, some somewhat cooler air right here. Meanwhile, a few minor disturbances that I highlighted for you here with this black dashed line could try at least to come on through during your day tomorrow. But overall, it's not going to be a huge deal. Eventually, the system exits, that area of low pressure exits. We start to see some drier air. And then we'll watch this oncomer for the end of the week and into the weekend, especially the second half of the weekend. I think that's where we could get at least a chance of rain, I should say, of gumption over the region. But even that still looks fairly low, and we're not seeing very high rain chances here. So good news for outdoor events, but bad news for the farmers, for the gardeners, anyone who needs that water, and bad news for those of us who want to have campfires or burn, because burn bans remain in place for parts of the region still. Boyd County, Lewis County, Kentucky, for instance, still under burn bans right now. Here's the American model, and again, showing you kind of a similar thing here. Minor disturbances trying to roll their way on through around this area of low pressure right here, highlighting one specifically tomorrow. We might see one on Wednesday try to come through as well. This eventually kicks out of here, and we'll start to see if this system out here has anything to do with any sort of rain that we could potentially see for the weekend. We'll have more on that a little bit later on. The problem is with these minor little disturbances, again, sloping up and over the Appalachians. I've said this before earlier in the show. There's so much dry air. As air goes up, all the water condenses out. So any of this moisture you see out here in the Atlantic Ocean is going to have a troubled time making it into our region because of the Appalachian Mountains. That's why we're only seeing shower chances here in the coal fields and into the mountains over the next few days, even though these disturbances want to try to come on through into the lowlands. The lowlands just continue to stay dry. As that air sinks, it dries out. So we're not going to be seeing any sort of gumptuous rain chance within the next, let's say, 7 days here, as long as that system remains in place, as long as we see some southeasterly winds sloping up and over the mountains. And look at all that dry air as we head into Friday, too, that'll be working on in. That's the European model. Again, the European model, or the American model, I should say, showing much of the same here, with all the moisture just kind of confined to the eastern slopes of the Appalachians out along the East Coast, whereas us, we remain dry until we get a system coming in from the west. If we do get a system coming in from the west, again, that's what's going to help those precipitation chances that we could potentially see moving in on down the line here. So let's look at the futurecast. This is the European model. The European model's done well over the last really a couple of weeks here, a couple of months even. And so this is going to give us the best look at what we could potentially be seeing over the next 24 hours. Again, a few showers possible out toward Elkins, out toward Greenbrier County, out toward, let's say, Pendleton County, well into the higher sloped terrain east of our viewing area. But I would not at all be surprised if you're in Summersville, if you're in Fayetteville, Richwood, Madison, Logan, Williamson, Pikeville, Phelps, places like that. Would not at all be surprised if you did see a light sprinkle like we're seeing today in those general areas both Tuesday and Wednesday. Thursday and Friday, again, that system kicks out. We stay dry. Huntington, Charleston, Louisa, Portsmouth, Gallipolis, Pomeroy, Ripley, even up toward Elizabeth, Spencer, you are going to stay dry, and those dry conditions continue. And it's unfortunate because the areas that need that rain the most are in those lowlands, even though there is a severe drought in parts of Webster County and parts of Upshur County and Randolph County. Within our viewing area, the lowlands need it the most, and we're just not going to be seeing it anytime soon. Here's what the European model says in terms of precipitation. And again, it's going to be hard to come by. Good news for those of us, though, in Virginia, out toward the Richmond area, you're going to be seeing a lot more of that precipitation. But for even Richwood, even Summersville, Fayetteville, it's going to be really, really hard to come by. This is total precipitation through Thursday, 10 p.m., by the way. The American model, again, showing the same thing. When you have that agreement between the two models like we're seeing here, it looks pretty likely that the end result is going to be fairly dry conditions over the region, unfortunately. These dry conditions have allowed some algae to develop in the Ohio River, and that's led to some not great conditions. Tony has more on that, plus we're going to get a look at the tropics as we could be tracking maybe our next named storm. Tony has much more on that.
Hi, Tony Cavaliere to discuss the drought situation across the area, which Nicholas is fortifying on First Alert Plus, and also to talk about the algae bloom last week on the Ohio River that caused a somewhat less quality of water into the Ashland intake. Ohio River running seasonally low. When we were taping this, we were watching a barge working its way slowly downstream. I say slowly, there's less flow, there's less water in the river. Rivers are lower, so naturally navigation is a little slower. And when you get these periods where it gets hot and dry at the end of the summer in particular, you can have algae blooms. They don't occur earlier in the summer for a couple of reasons, usually at least, and that's because oftentimes there's muggy air that produces showers and downpours, and the tropical air keeps water levels higher. But especially at the end of summer, the late summer dry heat allows for streams to slow, as we saw in the Ashland Weather Cam, and water levels to be down. Water temperatures are still in the 80s at this time of the year, and those water temperatures in the 80s support the blooming of algae. When I think algae, I think when I'm trying to fish at local lakes and streams, you get these algae formations, and when you flick your lure or your bait out, it gets caught in that green goo. Well, those algae blooms are more typical on small lakes and ponds, which have less flow. On the bigger lakes, they'll occur in coves, where there's less flow and where the blooms can thrive. Nutrients and chemicals, like nitrogen and phosphorus, are the ones that promote the algae blooms, and they can be enhanced by wastewater or fertilizers that are flushed into our waterways. It's all part of a drought that's going on across a good portion of America, at least a dry spell of note in our area. And I want you to note over a huge chunk of the country, there are drier than normal conditions. I want to focus my attention on a couple of those areas. It's odd how I was just flabbergasted when I read the drought monitor, which suggested that Myrtle Beach was abnormally dry. I said, wait a minute now. There's been 25 inches of rain this summer down at Myrtle Beach. I don't care how sandy the soil would be. Certainly that's enough moisture to keep Myrtle Beach from a drought. But let's put it in perspective. First half of the summer, defined as June and July, 12 inches of rain in Myrtle Beach. August, September, a total of 13 inches, but the last 20 days, only a ½ inch of rain has fallen down at the Grand Strand. So not a drought at the Grand Strand by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly it has been a little drier than normal here in the last 3 weeks. Charleston, using that for reference, first half of the summer, 13.5 inches of rain. And yes, the second half of the summer, defined as August into September, only 2 inches of rain over a 6-week period. So no wonder there are developing flash drought conditions across the WSAZ.com viewing area. 1, 2, 3, the levels. Southern West Virginia, I want you to think back 2 Fridays ago, downpours in southern West Virginia and parts of southeastern Kentucky, put a couple inches of rain down. So the farther south, there is a abnormally dry pattern that has set in, but not drought conditions out and out. Yet from the Ohio Valley into the Kanawha Valley, the level of drought, which goes from 1 to 5, goes 2 and even 3 inch, a level 3 into the eastern mountains of West Virginia. Stop right there. What do these numbers mean? Let's put it in perspective. It was the summer of 2024, which was the worst that many farmers have seen in their lifetime. That's a 5. And we know where it's dry down at Myrtle Beach or in southern West Virginia, it's a 1. So all we're doing is building with day by day the rain lacking in our area. We're building drought conditions. We won't get even close to the 5, I suspect, that we had last summer because we had a summer-long drought that developed, but already 3, and I could easily see a 3 enhancement before we get some rains by the time we get to, whether it's late this week, this weekend, or early next week. Expectations are some rains will finally break through for the first of fall. How do you get into a dry spell? How do you get into a drought? Well, it's pretty easy to understand. When it's dry over the continent, there's no moisture to evaporate to space. So during the summertime, oftentimes we have showers and thunderstorms that develop from moisture in the ground that evaporates to space. Cumulus clouds form and re-ring that out. In other words, we recycle showers and downpours into our area. But again, over the last 6 weeks now, we've had a minimal amount of rain, so there's no moisture to evaporate to space. And that's why temperatures are near 90 pretty much every day this week. You got to get into these streamlines of rain. If you get down in Florida here in September, it's been quite wet. Moisture coming off the Gulf and heading up the Atlantic seaboard. And at this time of the year, we like to look all the way over to the African continent for shower and thunderstorm clusters to come off the continent and run from east to west in that intertropical convergence zone we've been talking about here at First Alert Plus. And that goes all the way across Central America into the Pacific Ocean. Last week at this time, we were watching the Pacific for Hurricane Kiko that was weakening as it moved toward and to the north of Hawaii. But now we fast forward a week and we've been in these dry conditions now for the better part of 10, 11 days across our area. And I want you to watch where the rains are falling. Florida, northern Great Lakes, the monsoon coming from moisture from the Pacific up through the Rocky Mountains. These are called streamlines, and they define where the weather pattern moves. And in fact, with high pressure having dominated for so long, can you see how those streamlines are diverting away from our area? In other words, we need the high pressure to break down in order for a streamline of moisture to be sent in our direction. And once you channel that moisture in our direction, you wind up with, of course, much needed rain. Last year at this time, we were in that summer-long drought that would break at the end of September because of a tropical storm and eventually a hurricane that came out of the Caribbean Sea. Her name was Helene and came right through the WSAZ.com viewing area. Do you remember that Friday afternoon and night? There were tornado warnings. There were high windstorms knocking down trees from Huntington, Ironton, Ashland westward, and there was a healthy amount of rain that fell. In particular, while the Kanawha Valley got away with less than an inch of rain, it was much needed rain. Huntington, 2-3 inches, and toward Portsmouth, this pattern with Helene brought 6 inches of rain and flash flooding. And oftentimes, droughts in the fall season are broken or busted up by tropical systems. Don't use that word, kids, busted up. Busted is a slang word. Droughts break when rains from a tropical storm or hurricane come into our area. And expectations are, just looking at the overall pattern, it may very well take a late September or early October tropical storm or hurricane's remnants to break the dry spell, which is now a flash drought and which is going on 6 weeks across our area. Back to you, Nicholas, as I've described the pattern in the tropical Pacific Atlantic and as it relates to our algae blooms and, of course, our developing drought situation.
Certainly we don't want anything as bad as Hurricane Helene like we saw last year. Caused some damage, even a few tornado warnings, and a lot of flooding over in parts of the Scioto Valley in southern Ohio. But it would be nice to see at least some rain that could kind of help potentially temper that drought just a little bit. A gradual slowdown of that, but in an ideal world, that would be the case. It is not most certainly an ideal world, and we'll continue to stay dry. Some good news, though, is in the long-term forecast, and we're going to get right into it. The Rex block still remains in place. I mentioned this earlier. Lots of colder air and lots of activity further off to the west in this general zone right here in the Intermountain West, in parts of the Pacific Northwest, and even into the High Plains. Meanwhile, over our region, we're under this dry pattern that just continues to stick overhead, very stubborn. That's why they call it a blocking pattern, because it doesn't want to move. As long as this system continues to sit and spin here, that's going to be the case. And like I said earlier, it should still be here through the end of the week, and then we'll start to see some changes in that forecast. Here's what we're talking about as far as beyond once we head into Friday. So I'm going to move this back for us a little bit, take it a little bit slower, because that animation was pretty fast, and we'll kind of take a look at this together. The bad news is this system that is headed in for the weekend, and again, this is the European model right here. Notice how it kind of weakens. It loses its juice. That's thanks to just it being overtaken by warm air within the Rex block pattern. But we do start to see back to the west a little bit of a transition in our pattern here, a strong jet stream out in the Pacific, and the jet stream gets stronger overhead for sure once we head into the end of next week. Another dip in the jet stream, another trough could move on through. That could bring us some rain of gumption as well. Now, the bad news is that we're not seeing any major disruptions here in the polar vortex. That polar vortex is going to be the main thing that is going to drive some of that warmer weather out of here and some of the moisture into the region. So the polar vortex, very strong. We'll pause it here once we head to the middle of next week. This is where we start to get a little bit of a disruption right in here. We'll highlight this up toward the Hudson Bay. You'll notice some of the lighter greens kind of protruding to the north up into the Arctic Circle. That could be a case where we see maybe the development of some really disruption here to the polar vortex, where you see some of this warmer air kind of trying to surge on up and disrupt it here. If we do get that, that's where you could get one of those stronger systems that could push in some of these cooler temperatures. And I know a lot of us have been looking for fall-like weather. Unfortunately, fall-like weather is going to be hard to come by. But it looks like, again, we could start to see a few more systems trying to move on through, bringing in some more fall-like weather, but more importantly, bringing in some much-needed rain by the end of next week. So the weekend system not going to do a whole lot, and we'll talk about the precipcast and what the radar could look like on Saturday and Sunday in just a second. But once we head to the middle and end of next week, that's where we could see that pattern change and start to see some better conditions. Now, as far as temperatures go, it still looks warm. So the fall lovers, at least in the next 6 to 10 days, and again, this covers from Sunday all the way to Thursday of next week. The next really 10 days look to be warmer than average. Very warm, in fact, and that is shown on the 7 days. You'll see here in a second. Those temperatures are going to be toward the 90-degree mark. It's very summer-like overhead. Meanwhile, some good news in the precipitation department. This green area right here, we could see above normal precipitation. And again, that would come toward the middle and end of next week. And if that does happen, we'll be looking at so much better conditions and at least some help headed our way in terms of that drought monitor. So there could be some relief on the way. We'll just have to ultimately see by the middle of next week. But I do think Sunday there could be a small chance that we could see an isolated storm. Meanwhile, more likely next Wednesday and Thursday. So let's talk about that super 7-day forecast. We're looking fairly dry. Tuesday and Wednesday, we could have an isolated shower try to pop up in some of the higher elevation locations. Look how low this rain chance is, though. Very low. Not really going to be a huge deal for a lot of us. In fact, almost all of us are going to stay dry. It's in the higher elevation terrain, and even in that higher elevation terrain, that precipitation chance is extremely low. So not looking at too great of rain chances, really Tuesday or Wednesday. Sunday, that more stronger system, if you will, will try to come on through. We're looking at maybe an isolated shower or storm. Most of that activity further to the west where there's a bit more moisture. I do think in southern Ohio you will have a better bet as well because there's going to be a little bit more forcing up there. So the Apple Festival in Jackson could get a little rain on Sunday. Saturday and Friday, though, we're looking A-OK and dry. So those are the days to go up there. I know it's a huge deal up there. Get some apple butter. The weather's going to be hot, but it's going to be absolutely dry, sunny, fantastic on Friday and Saturday. Sunday's the day to watch for any sort of rain trying to move its way on through. And then next week, again, we'll ultimately have to see what this weather could bring in terms of any rain or adverse conditions that could be headed our way. But the good news is it does appear that there could be some rain chance that tries to move back in, and that could really help the situation in terms of any drought conditions or any sort of precipitation deficit that we are dealing with over the region. This is First Alert Weather Plus. We air every Monday, 6:45 p.m., talk about the latest in the weather, what you want to know. You can find us on YouTube at WSAZ First Alert Weather Plus. We're there. You can like and subscribe, and you can get some original content and some exclusive content, including the Wednesday Weather Lab. We're going to have much more on that coming up on Wednesday. Little experiments for those kiddos if they're at home, or teacher ideas for experiments if they want to learn a little bit more about the weather. That's the place to be. If you missed us and you don't want to subscribe to the YouTube channel, you can find us on WSAZ.com in the First Alert Weather Plus tab in the weather section of our website. Every episode is there. And Tony does some mini episodes during the week as well that you can watch as well. We're streaming on all of WSAZ's digital platforms, whether it be Android TV, Fire Stick, Roku, any of those places, Apple TV. And again, you can find us there. Sports Plus is on Tuesday if you want to catch that as well. And if you want to follow us on Facebook, definitely give us a follow. Meteorologist Nicholas Snyder is what I am on Facebook. Hannah Hayes is meteorologist Hannah Hayes. Dylan Godet is Dylan Godet Weather. And Tony Cavalier is Tony Cavalier. We post a lot of fun content on that Facebook page. So if you want to follow us, be sure to give us a follow. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. We really appreciate that. You'll get some exclusive content for doing that as well. We're working on getting some more stuff onto that YouTube channel as well. In the meantime, I'm meteorologist Nicholas Snyder. Make it a great Monday, everybody.